I'm Avery Corman. I'm at the intersection of the Grand Concourse and Fordham Road in the Bronx. This was the main retail area for this part of the world, and also where most of the movie theaters were located. And it was along here, along the Grand Concourse, that on every Memorial Day during World War II, there were large parades with thousands of people lining the sidewalks and looking out the windows. I was about 6 when the war began, and I was about 10 when it ended. So I went from a small child with barely a perception of what was going on to an older child with a somewhat better grasp of reality. Because the war was embedded in our day-to-day life. All around us was the home front during World War II. Shortages, rationing, bunting in store windows, posters like loose lips, sink ships. People in uniform were in the neighborhood. We saw air raid wardens wearing their helmets and armbands, and during the air raid tests, they would shine their flashlights up at anybody who hadn't pulled his shades all the way down and screamed out, "Lights out over there." There were cartoon images of Hitler, Tojo, and Mussolini all around us. The nation was at war, our neighborhood was at war, our block was at war, our families were at war. There were constant bond drives, and nearby at the Loew's Paradise Theater, they erected something called Liberty Bell Bridge, and if you bought a war bond, you walked up the steps and rang the bell for freedom. One of the ironies of this time was that there was no war to see, so the only war we got to see was the war we saw in movies. And for the children, it was a very potent image. In the movies, bombs fell, blood was spilled, people died. As a result of all of this, and we devoured the movies, we children were swimming in militant fantasies. On all our books, we would draw pictures of planes and guns and tanks, and it was just a wash of war fantasies. We followed the war in our local newspaper, which was the Bronx Home News. And the Bronx Home News specialized in very simplified coverage that even a child could follow. Broad maps and pincers showing the lines of battle. Throughout the neighborhood in windows, you would see little flags. They were blue stars on a white field, and those indicated that someone in that apartment was in service. And here and there you would see a gold star in a white field, which indicated a gold star mother, someone who had lost a child in the war. We children were constantly caught up in the war effort. Whether anything we did mattered, I really don't know. It probably helped our morale, but we collected scrap paper for the scrap paper drives. We saved Minutemen stamps, and they were supposed to lead to a bond, a war bond. I don't know if during the entire war I ever got enough stamps together to buy a bond. We rooted for the teams at West Point and Annapolis because they were Army and Navy. We wrote to servicemen away. My cousin was in the Air Force, and it was my duty to write to him. And we understood to some degree what was going on. We certainly understood shortages. Bubble gum was very hard to get, but if you actually got a piece, after you chewed it, you put it in a glass of water and stored it overnight like false teeth. We memorized silhouettes of enemy aircraft, the Stuka, the Zero, the Messerschmitt, the Focke-Wulf. We knew those cold, and if we ever saw one over the neighborhood, we were going to call it into the police and nail it for sure. In 1945, VE Day arrived, victory in Europe, and then VJ Day, victory in Japan when the war ended. The neighborhood was a blizzard of paper. Children, adults were throwing toilet paper off roofs, newspapers out windows. The streets were covered with paper. We ran through it, we kicked it like snow. I just happened to be on the street where a Gold Star mother lived, and I saw her at that moment with all of the paper falling on all sides, open her window, and she held out a small little bag and turned it upside down, and in it were carefully cut strips of paper. She watched as the last of the paper floated to the ground, and then she closed her window on the war. I'm in front of my elementary school, PS 33 in the Bronx, on Jerome Avenue, just south of Fordham Road. It was 1942 when I was enrolled here. School then went up to 6th grade. When I'm here at the site, it seems to remind me that the school had its own underscoring. Do you know the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man? Do you know the Muffin Man that lives on Drury Lane, which we sang and skipped to while a teacher played the piano? Who do you think you'll get? Was the question that we always asked each other at the start of each school year. And we could do that because by and large, the teachers were the same teachers year after year after year. The strict ones, the mean ones, the nice ones. They played true to form, and they were exactly who we expected them to be. You used to have to bring a handkerchief with you to school and show it. And you had to have book covers for your books, which we bought or we made. One of the great fears is that you would get chicken pox and your family would get quarantined. And you did get the chicken pox and they weren't quarantined. This comes to mind. Now write the numbers that you hear in the third column. 4, 3, 2, 1. These were the insidious hearing tests. They would decrease the volume as you went through the test to the point where you could not hear at all, and you'd be looking around the room to see if any of the other children were still writing their numbers down when you couldn't hear yours. This was the time before ballpoint pens, and we actually had inkwells with wet ink and brought metal tip points on wood pens and dipped them in the inkwells. And we would write with them. We went through all of our elementary school years with ink stains on our fingers. We were taught tolerance. Now, tolerance was to be tolerance for the beliefs and nature of others, which is better than intolerance, but not as far as acceptance. And to drive the point home, we were shown repeatedly a movie called The House I Live In, with a song, The House I Live In, starring Frank Sinatra. This was the Bobby Soxers Frank Sinatra, not the Nelson Riddle Frank Sinatra who came afterward. On June 6, 1944, it was D-Day, and we third graders, most of us who were 8 years old, were sent to various houses of worship to pray for the safe return of our soldiers. Now, the interesting thing about that, third graders, 8 years old, we did not go home to get adults. We just moved freely through these neighborhoods. These were our neighborhoods. We owned them. Many of the teachers in those days were here year after year. Many men who could not get jobs in corporate America because they were Jewish and because of anti-Semitism, or they were Italian American and couldn't get jobs, or Irish American, gravitated toward teaching during the Depression. Girls who were smart in those days couldn't get jobs either. Smart girls were teachers. So we had in place for us when we came through in the 40s and 50s, this really, really outstanding group of people who at another time never would have been in the teaching profession. They were solid, conscientious, intelligent people, and we, children of the working class, were privileged in having them as our teachers, people who in a later day wouldn't have been in teaching at all. This was a co-ed school. To the boys, the girls weren't alien. They were our buddies. We played games with them. They had the same fears as we did in school. Like my friend Cecilia Klein, who sent a photocopy to me of the page I autographed in her souvenir graduation book in 6th grade. An early literary effort of mine. I wrote, "Good luck, you dumb cluck." And then from here, we went to all girls and all boys junior high schools, and mostly all girls and all boys high schools. So we moved from what was a absolutely even, wonderful social arrangement to a place of distance. I have to say, I still haven't gotten over it. I'm on Creston Avenue between Field Place and 184th Street in the Bronx. This street was the street game stadium of my youth. Most people, when they go back to a place they grew up in, have the same reaction as I am having, which is, I thought it was larger. Everything seemed so much smaller when you came back. The premier game was stickball. And it was a beautiful game because it occupied an entire city block. We used a pink Spalding, and in our version of stickball, we self-hit the ball and ran the bases. The police were always coming by to break up games because we could break a window. We saw them coming sometimes in advance and pretended we were playing punchball and hid the stick, which was a pretty lame ruse because the outfielders were a block away and nobody could punch a ball that far. The supers were the enemies of stickball too, and if they were aggressive enough to grab one of our balls, some of them would just take a penknife and puncture it. Suddenly, as if by decree, there would come the marbles season, and we would be out on this street playing marbles, trading immies and puries and cabolas. Gambling really took the form of putting a box at your feet with different holes in them. Kids would try to roll the marbles into the box. Depending upon which hole it went in, they would collect a number of marbles from you, or you would collect their marble. We played hangman with chalk on the sidewalk, a spelling game where if you guessed wrong trying to figure out an opponent's word that he spelled, the hangman would hang you. Behind me is the schoolyard of the Bronx High School of Science, which was then located here, although it's barely a schoolyard. But we used every inch of this place like farmers using terrace landscaping. And we played basketball here day and night. Most of the kids who grew up around here had decent basketball skills. We used this little area here and played punch ball. That wall, we played handball. We played pitching in stickball and hit the ball out into the street, and we played box ball against the wall. We used everything we could. And it was here, in the back end of the Bronx High School of Science, that I encountered the talking dog. One day, I walked up and a group of my friends were gathered around jumping up and down, and a man was standing there with a German Shepherd. And I came up to the outside of the crowd, and the guy said to this German Shepherd, "What do you want?" And the dog said, unmistakably, "Want a hamburger." And he said, "What? Hamburger." Well, we were cracking up. We were almost peeing in our pants from delight. He did it again and then walked away, and you can see from his expression he was discouraging us from following him. And that would have been the end of the talking dog story, except it's not. A couple of weeks later, I was listening to a radio program, one of those amateur shows, Major Bose or Ted Mack, one of those programs, and a man was introduced with a talking dog. It's the same guy, the same voice, and he said to the dog on the radio, "What do you want?" And the dog said, "Want a hamburger." And the guy said, "What? Hamburger." And that was his act. He walked off to great applause, the talking dog. He was the first celebrity I ever saw. After World War II ended, gas rationing was lifted, and suddenly this street wasn't the street it had been during the war years. There was a lot of traffic coming down the street that we had never experienced during the war years. We had to move off the street. Occasionally we might try to get a stickball game going, but there was too much traffic. We had to play on the sidewalks or in the science yard, and the golden age of our street games had ended, of children large and small playing with chalk and marbles and jump rope and stickball in the street. We were simply overrun by Buicks and DeSotos, like hippopotamuses in our midst. I'm at the site of the old Yankee Stadium, the Yankee Stadium of my growing up years, on River Avenue south of 161st Street in the Bronx. This was here until it was demolished, and then in 2009 the new Yankee Stadium was built, the one behind me. In our neighborhood, most of us were Yankee fans, although we did have a few Giants fans sprinkled amongst us. The Polo Grounds where the Giants played was only one subway stop away. Ebbets Field, where the Dodgers played, seemed too far. It was in a mysterious place in Brooklyn. In my growing up years, 1947 looms large. I came into a peak of awareness, as did all of my friends, just as Jackie Robinson was signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers, the first African-American to ever play Major League Baseball. And that was a really wonderful time to be coming into your own, following baseball, because Jackie Robinson was something special on every level. To watch him bedevil pitchers as he took his leads off first, or run from first to third or second home in that choppy gait of his, very rapid, it was a sight to behold, and you never kind of forgot it. He was amazing, and we Yankee fans did not root against the Dodgers, Robinson, or the Giants. There was no interleague play then during the regular season. It was only when they played in the World Series against the Yankees you might have rooted against them. But we were all fans of our local teams. 2 seasons after Robinson came into baseball, the Giants signed Monty Irvin and Hank Thompson, also African Americans, But the Yankees were arrogant in their racism and stubborn, and it took 8 years till 1955 when finally Elston Howard was signed by the Yankees, the first African-American player. There were many notable seasons when we were growing up, and then there was the 1949 season, which was in a separate category. That was the year that Joe DiMaggio missed the first couple of months with an injury, and then he hit .346 for the rest of the season. The Yankees went into the end of the season trailing the Red Sox. The Yankees won both those games, won the pennant, and went on to defeat the Dodgers in the World Series. I had a very good year in 1949. One day my mother gave me a baseball glove, and she said a man she knew in business was a good friend of Joe DiMaggio, and this was Joe DiMaggio's glove. Well, I looked at it, and it looked like an old scuffed baseball glove, and looking closer, it said Lynn Larry on it. It was a Lynn Larry engraved glove, and I said to my mother, "This is not a Joe DiMaggio glove, it says Lynn Larry on it." Now, Lynn Larry was a pretty good shortstop for the Yankees, and he had a popular glove. I asked my mother, why does it say Lynn Larry if it's Joe DiMaggio's glove? And she was prepared with an answer she was given by this guy. And he said the ball players didn't always use the gloves they endorsed, and Joe DiMaggio liked this model. So the next day I took it up the block to my friends and I announced I had Joe DiMaggio's glove. One of my friends looked at it, examined it closely, and says, "It says Lynn Larry on it." They all convened and decided that I just had any old baseball glove, not Joe DiMaggio's glove. So if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? If you have a glove that you say is Joe DiMaggio's glove and you don't have proof of it, is it Joe DiMaggio's glove? Was it Joe DiMaggio's glove? Beats me. I'm at the site of the Loew's Paradise Theater on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, just south of 188th Street. This was a movie palace in every sense of the word. For reasons that escape me, we used to call it the Loew's Paradise. We called all of the theaters in the chain Loew's, but this was the Loew's Paradise. It opened in 1929, and it was created by a man named John Eberson, who specialized in what he called atmospherics, and these were these palatial movie houses. This theater seated 3,800 people. It was insane inside. Statuary, Italian cupids, statues on all sides, balconies. It had a sky with moving clouds and stars. It was really a movie palace in every sense of the word. Before television, there were other movie theaters around here in abundance: the Windsor, the Valentine, the Fordham, the Grand, the Concourse, the Ascot, but this was the creme de la creme. The Ascot, a block and a half from here, was the first and only art movie theater house in the Bronx. It showed foreign films, and my aunt and uncle were deaf mutes, so they loved the Ascot because when they saw a foreign film, they could follow it through the titles word for word. I kept getting gathered up when I was a little boy as members of our family would go to the Ascot. So I actually grew up from a very young and tender age watching classic foreign films. After the war, neo-realist films started coming in, films like The Bicycle Thief, Paisan, Open City. The theater manager didn't know, nor did any of us, that these were going to be considered great films of all time. So he would stand outside the theater after the Friday weekend showing of a movie like Open City and say to the people as they were coming out, "So, did you like it? Was it good?" And this was Open City. When we got older, I wanted to show that we were smart guys dating a girl who seemed intelligent. To show that we were intellectuals, we took them to the Ascot. Here in the Paradise, the movie customs that we had seem to have vanished completely from the culture. You wouldn't go to a movie to see a 7:30 show or a 9:30 show. You just went to the movie, and you walked in whenever you arrived. With a double feature, you had a chance of at least seeing one movie intact, but you would often say to somebody after you've gone through the movie, "Did we come in here?" And if you really liked the movie, you'd see it again to the end. Another custom that seems to have vanished is if there were no seats, people would just stand on the side aisles and wait for someone to get up and then occupy the seat. On Saturday mornings, we occupied this place as children for marathons of selected short subjects, as they call them, and cartoons and a double feature. Unfortunately, we had to sit in the children's section, presided over by matrons in uniforms, who would shine the lights at us if we talked too loudly, or, which we customarily did, hum through our candy boxes during the love scenes. Stories of the Paradise circulated through the neighborhood. It was always about the Paradise, not about any other movie theaters for some reason. And the stories were told by the big shots, the better ball players or the older guys. And it went something like this. Went to the Paradise, picked up a girl, started a neck, felt her up. This was astonishing to me as an impressionable teenager, how you would even do that. And of course, I didn't, which is why they were the big shots. And here's the thing about those stories. I believed them.